fundsupermart.com.
Hi, we particularly favor emerging markets given their attractive valuations and higher potential upside as compared to their developed counterparts. Does PineBridge share the same view?
Okay, yes, I think over the medium term, we certainly do, and perhaps even over the long term, there are very strong undercurrents fundamentally across the emerging markets favoring demographic type plays or even domestic growth type plays. So yes, over the long run and in the medium term, we would agree. In the short term, we actually have a little bit of a different view. In the short term, some of the emerging markets have appeared to gotten ahead of earnings and expectations. And while investors might actually be patient in some emerging markets where you see structural reforms, policy reforms like you see in India, for instance, or Mexico, for instance, we think they may not be as patient with other markets. Now, maybe a way to look at this also is in the context of developed markets. We actually think that right now the near-term opportunities are tied more with the US market, the largest developed market out there. And in the US market, we see opportunities in terms of near-term growth, at least for a 12-month outlook. In the case of stepped up investment spending and many cyclical themes coming back into play, where we believe that it is going to be positive for revenue growth, positive for earnings growth thereafter as a consequence of that. And also in terms of a seasonal aspect in the near term, as you might recall, there has been some weakness with US sales, especially with the consumer, tied to a very bad winter season. Typically when you do have poor weather, it does stall the economy, but it's usually very temporary, and we're already seeing the first signs of that snapping back, and we expect that to continue.
What are the main headwinds for the recovery in developed markets?
The headwinds, we would think that it's probably mostly tied to Europe. The US looks pretty steady right now, and we think that will continue. But in Europe, there's definitely investor sentiment. There's still skittishness regarding the broader recovery across the Eurozone. Furthermore, on a structural basis, we think that the Eurozone has to address more of the labor reform issues. It's a very restrictive labor policy across the European markets, and in order to sustainably create a nice foundation for growth, they do have to incorporate potentially more flexible policies and potentially trigger a higher rate of workforce mobility.
What investment themes do you favor at the moment?
So maybe that question we could tie into a difference between emerging and developed markets, because the themes are going to be somewhat different. As I alluded to in emerging markets, for instance, over the long run, we think there's very powerful undercurrents with regards to demographics, domestic growth, and we think that's not going away. And many of the emerging markets around the world do share that characteristic. But there's other themes at play in the near term where we're finding a lot of opportunities, such as those themes tied to e-commerce. For instance, the technology supply chain, particularly with smartphone proliferation. Clean energy is a very, very big one, especially around kind of greater China, especially mainland China as well. Furthermore, we believe consumer spending will continue to increase at a faster rate across the emerging markets. Now, the developed markets, we find more structural themes, such as generics penetration is still continuing to sustain their momentum, and self-help type stories, such as share repurchases, merger and acquisition activity is quite high this year relative to more recent years. And as I mentioned, the investment spending cycle we do see as a big opportunity. So those are the type of themes that we see in the market today.
India did really well in the first half of 2014, largely due to the positive impact from the elections. Is this boost temporal?
We would actually disagree with that. We believe that it's much more structural in nature. It can be described as a fundamental groundswell of policy reform. I mean, this has been a long time coming with India, and maybe to put things in context with India, a way to look at it is maybe pre-post-crisis India. So pre-financial crisis India, much of the economic growth was driven by investment spending. It helped to subdue inflationary pressures. It helped to keep the current account deficit steady and low. And it really created capacity for the market to meet the oncoming demand. So a much more sustainable platform for growth. And then you go post-crisis, and then the stories start to change. The economic indicators fell through, as in most economies, but they changed the game in the sense of pursuing more accelerated consumer spending. And what that triggered was an inflationary cycle. It also increased current account deficit, as we've seen. And it really did create a dislocation or an imbalance between supply and demand. So we think that in the context of history, given the BJP and Modi's overwhelming victory in India and the policy reforms that are going to start taking place favoring investment spending, we can see where the future of India may go, and therefore we believe that the Indian market as a whole is under-earning right now. So we're quite positive on India.
What are the economic challenges ahead for India?
The economic challenges, we would say, are tied to the policy reform. It's almost a double-edged sword, I would say. So anytime you have groundbreaking reform, there are going to be some parties that are probably not going to be very happy. But they're a must. It's not a question of if, but when. And we're already seeing a collaboration between Modi and the Reserve Bank of India with respect to lending type reforms. And we expect that to continue. The reason why we're confident that these reforms will go through and we're optimistic of the changes that are coming is because of the overwhelming victory of Modi and the BJP. It's very rare to see that type of a unified approach to the political backdrop. And therefore, we believe that a majority of India's constituents will be behind Modi and allow him for some time to let these reforms pass.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.